Thank you so much to Cash and Elliot for doing a good job. I am really thrilled to introduce our next two guests. It gives me more than a little pleasure an honor to welcome Margaret Brennan of CBS News Face the Nation and U.S. Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona, who is a true summer learning champion. And I welcome them to the stage. From foreign policy to the economy and education, Margaret Brennan tackles it all as both moderator of CBS News Face the Nation and the network's chief foreign affairs correspondent. Margaret's interviews with top lawmakers, scientists, and executives during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic earned Face the Nation 2 Emmy Award nominations. As the second woman to host the venerable 67-year-old CBS News broadcast, Margaret continues each Sunday the legacy of civil, informed conversations on what's become America's #1 top-rated Sunday public affairs broadcast. As the second woman to host the venerable CBS News broadcast, Margaret continues the legacy. We already did that, didn't we? At any rate, Margaret and Dr. Cardona are going to have a little fireside chat, and I'll let them take over from here. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, thank you, Jim, and for everyone gathered here today. First of all, it's nice to see people gathered together again and be here in person. And I don't, obviously, to this audience, really need to introduce our next guest, but I will do so. Dr. Miguel Cardona is America's 12th Secretary of Education. He was sworn in last March in the midst of the pandemic, and he previously served as a Commissioner of Education in Connecticut, a position he was appointed to by Governor Ned Lamont in August of 2019. In that role, he faced the unprecedented challenge of responding to the COVID pandemic and led the school reopening efforts in my home state of Connecticut. He has 2 decades of experience as a public school educator from the city of Meriden. He began his career as a teacher and later served as a principal in Meriden. And in 2012 won the National Distinguished Principal Award for the state and the Outstanding Administrator Award from UConn's School of Education. So he has been in your shoes. He has been thinking quite a lot about this role in education now. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. Thank you. There's so much to talk about, but let's start on one of the newest developments, and that is the green light for children's vaccines. I know you sent a letter to school districts all across this country asking them to organize vaccine clinics now that a vaccine is available to elementary school age children 5 to 11. Are you satisfied with the uptake so far? How is the demand? Is it more or less than what you expected?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to be here, and I know when you wrap up summer school, you have like an end of summer school celebration, but this place is beautiful. Like, I'm singing at the party. This is amazing. I was walking by and I heard singing. I said, wow, they do it right here. Happy to be here, and I'm so glad you're able to do this in person. I want to say thank you for all you've done for our children across the country. Our reopening efforts wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the work of the people in this room. Thank you for what you've done for our children across the country. Thank you. Yes, vaccination for 5 to 11-year-olds is now possible. We are thrilled. We know we've been waiting, collectively holding our breaths. And, as a father, let me answer this as a father first. I remember bringing my children, my daughter is 15, my son is just turned 17. But when they were eligible, I remember, I reopened schools in Connecticut with a great team, and now nationally working to reopen schools across the country. But when you experience that as a parent, I breathed easier that day. When my youngest was finally vaccinated, as a father, I felt like I'm doing everything to protect her. And across the country, parents are breathing that sigh of relief. And yes, schools have a role. We know that in this rollout for the younger students, it's really important, more so than ever before, that our schools connect with our pediatricians, with our children's hospitals, so that our medical experts are providing the information. And we've seen great examples. We've seen schools invite pediatricians to the PTO meetings or PTA meetings, and set up clinics where they have folks on hand, because parents have a lot of questions for the little ones. I am pleased with what I'm seeing. I love the intentional partnerships, the intentional collaboration that we're seeing now between our schools and our medical providers and our health experts. And that's going to be critical as we get the numbers up so that more and more children are protected and can attend school in person, which is the goal.
Well, I'm jealous because my preschooler is obviously still not eligible. So there are parents like me who are still with bated breath on this. But do you foresee a real problem with vaccine hesitancy? Because we did see some reservations for those between 12 and 17. There wasn't as much uptake as expected. For the elementary school kids, is it better so far?
Well, what we're doing now is it's starting to roll out, so we don't have those data yet. But what we do know is that we had the benefit of experiencing the rollout for 12 to 17-year-olds. So there's much more communication, much more partnership to make sure that parents have the information that they need. And the younger they are, the more hesitancy there will be. Yeah. But we have to understand that it's our role to meet parents where they are and help them feel comfortable with having their children vaccinated. We know it's safe, and that's why our pediatricians are stepping up. And I'm really pleased with the role of our medical partners in speaking to parents and communicating very effectively that this is the best thing they can do to protect their children.
Do you expect the administration to recommend COVID vaccine to the states, to the governors who issue the requirements for kids to enter the classroom? Should we expect elementary school age kids to soon face requirements?
We've made strong recommendations that states work with their health partners to make them accessible and communicate the importance of it, and where necessary, require it. But we leave that up to the states. Our job is to make sure that we're communicating the safety of it, accessibility, and making sure that we're providing American Rescue Plan funds to make it accessible. I've visited dozens of vaccine clinics across the country in the last 6-7 months, from HBCUs to community centers that work with families and children over the summer. It's all hands on deck. So our role is really to communicate the effectiveness of it and encourage states to do everything they can to get their numbers up. And in many cases, they're requiring it. They're mandating it. And we support any effort to keep our children safe and keep our children in school.
But we haven't seen states really come out with a clear position other than the state of California. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think there needs to be one?
I think in many cases what they're doing is waiting for the final approval.
So that it's not on emergency use.
Correct, and we saw in some cases where the numbers weren't as high, we saw a greater likelihood of requiring it in those places where the numbers were really low. We know it's safe, we know it works, and what we're finding, the data that we do have available is in those places that really moved forward quickly to get the vaccination percentages higher, those districts, those states had less interruption in school, which means less interruption for working parents, and things were able to move more normally. So we're strongly encouraging it, and we're seeing the effects, positive effects, when the numbers are high. People are able to get to work and get to school like they normally would.
Well, you mentioned where I was taking you, which is the start-stop of it all. because if you're a parent and you wake up and your kid has the sniffles, you might not be able to drop them off until you get them a COVID test. So even with the vaccine rollout, do you expect some of these health restrictions or advisories to still be in place in school districts for the foreseeable future, which means there are still disruptions, mandatory quarantines, recommended quarantines, those kind of things that parents have to deal with that do disrupt their children's lives?
Right. You know, one of the things I remember when reopening in Connecticut, there was no playbook, right? And we were initially, I don't know if you recall, when this first came out, March 2020, we were following transmission patterns of the flu. We didn't have anything to compare it to.
Right, which was completely wrong.
Right. And now we have a year's worth of data. But you mentioned earlier about vaccination hesitancy. We have to keep in mind that for many families, especially families who have people with illness, underlying conditions, it's the use of those mitigation strategies that make them feel comfortable sending their children to school. Mm-hmm. It's the surveillance testing protocols that make them feel comfortable sending their child with an underlying condition to school. So I do think that we need to keep in mind that we're able to have the success that we're having across the country. 100% of the schools are open for in-person learning, and the closures happen when there are spikes. We're able to do that because of the use of the mitigation strategies. And we're always going to lean on the science. We're always going to lean on our health partners to be the ones to guide the process when it's appropriate to remove them.
But I ask that because you have the start-stop of school closures related to outbreaks. Mm-hmm. Is what you're saying, is the bottom line, that remote learning is here to stay? Because if there's a case in a classroom, you either need to shut it down or have quarantines. You're just going to continue to have this cycle for the foreseeable future. Does the administration have like a number, in your mind, where if we get to X number of vaccines, we don't need to do this kind of thing anymore? We don't foresee a future where a large part of the education system has to go remote on a regular basis.
Right. Well, I would hope that we get to the point where we don't have to do it because of the pandemic. But I will tell you, prior to COVID, blended learning was something that was really viewed as an enhancement to education. And I still believe that to be the case. I mean, I saw amazing examples over the summer where while we had in-person learning options, students' learning was enhanced through online opportunities or blended learning, where it's a mix of in-person and remote.
A lot of parents were not big fans of this.
Yeah,
Do I know that?
But I also think we need to be. Let's think about the potential. I remember talking to a young lady, a student in high school in a Midwest state, who said, "I'm able to take an AP course now with a teacher that's several states away because of the online opportunity." So I think if it enhances learning, great, but we should not be thinking about closing schools regularly if we know the mitigation strategies work. And that's why our message has been from day one, follow the mitigation strategies, get vaccinated when you can. Our kids, like you said, nobody's a big fan of having schools shut down and having the kids stay at home. I can tell you my kids didn't appreciate it. They were happy to be back at school. So we have to make sure we're doing what we have to do so that we can limit the disruption of schools. And I think we know what to do. It's not like where we were last year where we were looking at the flu. We know what works. Let's follow what works so our kids have a chance to learn in school.
So you said, I think, 100% back to in-person. McKinsey's recent analysis said the pandemic impact on K through 12 learning left students on average 5 months behind in math, 4 months behind in reading. Does that sound right to you? Is that the right estimate of the damage?
I think it is, but I think that's limited in its ability to assess the true impact, right? Think about the social and emotional well-being of our learners, the lack of ability to engage in extracurricular activities where students learn a lot about themselves. So I appreciate the McKinsey report in that it really quantifies the challenges that we're going to have coming forward and the importance of using the rescue plan funds to provide stronger summer learning experiences, good wraparound services, good after-school programming. It really brings home that message. But I also think as educators, we know, as parents, we know our children missed out on more than just the academics. They missed out on that FaceTime with that teacher. They missed out on relational. We talk a lot about the digital divide. I always say the relational divide was more impactful. Kids missed out on being with kids. And that's why it's critically important to have programs like the ones that were fostered by the folks in this room over the summer, where kids were able to engage with one another on an interpersonal level for that social and emotional well-being.
How big of a mistake was it to have schools closed for as long as they were in so many districts?
I wouldn't frame it as a mistake. In some districts, I think, and again, I'm going to go back to...
Because what you're saying is these kids deserve better.
Well, no, we need to be open now. There's no reason now, with the science that we have now, the vaccination strategy we have now, there's no reason we should be planning for hybrid learning. Only when there's community outbreaks, right? And keep in mind, school outbreaks are 90% of the time are there outbreaks in the community that come into the school.
Right.
So right now, there should be no need for remote or hybrid learning. We should be controlling community spread. In the places that are not doing it well, we're seeing it. But going back to that question more globally, it's really important to note that every community is a little bit different. And if the community spread is high, we know that's trickling into the schools, and we need to protect our students, protect our staff. But very frank with you, fall of this year, we know what works, we know what to do to keep our students and staff safe, and there's no reason why schools should have opened in remote, unless in the community they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing to mitigate the spread of COVID.
Mm-hmm. And we know, I don't have to remind you of state by state, community by community, what that
Don't
fight
get me
looks
started,
like right
please.
now.
I'm in a great mood. I heard music. Don't get me started.
But when we talk about the full weight of what children have been asked to bear, you referenced mental health. That seems to really only be getting discussed now. There's an estimated over 140,000 kids who lost a parent or grandparent or caregiver to COVID. There's a lot of anxiety that children are dealing with related to the virus itself. How do you reimagine education in a way that can deal with these virtually unprecedented challenges in an adequate way?
140,000 children under the age of 18 lost a parent or guardian. 65% of those are students, Black and brown students who historically have been underserved. We got our work cut out for us. It's tragic, but I'm filled with hope. I'm filled with optimism that we're going to rise to the occasion, that we're going to not talk about SEL as if it's a thing you do when you're done with everything else, but we're going to embed it into what schools, the DNA of schools. I was in Canton, Michigan recently, and I visited a campus of a high school. All total, there were 6,000 students in this high school, 3 different campuses, huge. The superintendent and the principal there had the bold leadership gall to say, we're going to embed social and emotional well-being into the school day of every child. So in an 8-period schedule, every single day, for at least one period, students are engaging in social and emotional well-being or mental health supports. Mm-hmm. That's significant. And that meant that that district invested with the use of American Rescue Plan funds in training for our educators. I think gone are the days where we think that you get a 15, 20-minute PD and now you're experts in something. We need to invest in our educators so that they can have the tools to support our students. So I'm optimistic that we're going to really rethink things. We're the closest now to reset on so many things that we know didn't work. Kind of like the schedule, right? We're here talking about summer learning, and why is it that we have a schedule that promotes summer slide? Let's rethink things, and let's invest in the things that we know work. Social and emotional learning and access to mental health supports needs to be such a prominent part of our schools moving forward. And I also say not only for our students, but for our adults. We often forget that it's not just the kids that went through this. You know, our adults, our educators, our bus drivers, our cafeteria workers, our teachers, we've all experienced loss. And we have to be prepared to be an inclusive environment, not only for our students, but for the adults that serve our students.
You know, it was a national trauma.
Yeah.
But to that point, I mean, if you just look at the statistics, what you're talking about is asking to do more for good reason. But the people we're asking to do more are also under the strain. 1 in 4 American teachers reported considering leaving their job by the end of the last academic year, according to RAND. Education Week did a survey earlier this year. It showed 76% of educators said teacher morale is lower than it was prior to the pandemic. So how do you ask these people to do more year-round when they are flat out exhausted?
You know, it's not asking them to do more. It's supporting them the way we know they need to be supported. With the rescue plan, there's a commitment for social emotional well-being. We need to hire more social workers. We need to work with the folks that are in this room right now to say, how do we partner? Because you're doing that work. It's not adding more to the teacher's plate. It's looking at schools as hubs of community. How are we engaging with the folks in the community to help us serve children? It's providing the right professional learning opportunities for teachers, giving them pathways for continuous growth, but not doing it without taking something out. There are funds in education at the levels that I've never seen, and I've been in education for a quarter of a century. Never seen a commitment like this. We can't squander that or expect that we go to the old model that just adds on to teachers. If our school systems are not evolving to have more school counselors, more social workers, more mental health supports in the school and from the community, then we're not doing our jobs.
So I have so many questions for you, but I want to pick up on something you were just referring to, which is going back to the community and to the mental health of educators themselves. There are a lot of angry parents. Parents are angry for good reasons. Some of them just flat out angry about everything that they went through and everything that their kids just went through. And there may be a political cost to it. Look at what just happened in the state of Virginia with education, a main campaign issue for the Republican candidate there. That's not going to be the only place. This is a really effective thing. This is a lightning rod issue. You know that. How are you going to deal with that? How do you advise people who work in education to deal with what the administration has acknowledged are security risks because of what's happening at school boards around this country?
You know, there's so much emotion, and I think you hit it right on the head. There's a lot of not post because we're still in it, but there's a lot of fatigue and there's a lot of frustration with the lingering effects of COVID, how we're 18, 19, 20 months already, and we're still having to talk about masks. We're still talking about distancing. There's still a plexiglass between us. Thankfully, we're in person, but these things are just starting to happen. People are fatigued. But I think, you know, schools are communities. Schools are places where we bring people together. And I'm glad we're back in person. I can't think of another place where my kids will want to be more, or where I feel like a second home than my child's school. So, you know, I have complete confidence in our educators to bring in diverse perspectives. That's what this country was founded on. Let's have civil conversations about what we should be doing in our schools.
Conversations aren't that civil.
Right.
You've seen the
But, you know, there's that extreme, but I am confident that our schools can be those places where we get those conversations and we have different perspectives and we do it under one flag. We're all Americans here. There is a lot of frustration. There are some folks, a very vocal minority, that are not doing it in a way that's civil, but the reality is the vast majority across the country are willing to re-engage and have those conversations in a way that's meaningful. That's why those systems are set up the way they are.
But this is going to be an increasingly politicized space.
It is. Yeah.
How are you going to deal with that? How do you tell people who touch this space to deal with it, who
Yeah.
have to go face-to-face with these parents and these kids?
Well, you know what? Keep it student-centered. We know what we signed up to serve children. We signed up to help the next generation of leaders develop critical skills, critical thinking, learn how to engage with people that think differently than them. Stay close to the root of why you got into this profession, and that will prevail. And we're going to continue to serve our students. We're going to continue to serve our parents and work in partnership with them. That's why we signed up for this. Yes, things have gotten political. So have masks, so have vaccines. Stay focused on what we do best, which is serve children, help them expand their minds, and give them an opportunity to enjoy school and be a part of a community. That's what we do best, and we're going to continue to do that.
But because please, that deserves some. Because this has gotten so hot, how does that complicate what you just said, which was you have this record amount of funds to be able to spend and invest? That means every bit of that dollar is going to be even more scrutinized, how it's all addressed. I mean, just look at even what's taught in the classrooms now that children are back in. 22 states moving to try to ban how race is taught.
The funds provide an opportunity, and the president is very clear. We need to be innovative. We need to close gaps. Listen, we've normalized achievement disparities in our country, where the sense of urgency that we feel now in this room, in this country, is at a high pitch because we realize that the pandemic disproportionately widened opportunity and achievement gaps. For those 140,000 students, 65% of whom are black and brown, their lives are forever changed, and they're coming into our schools. We have a responsibility and obligation to make sure our schools are better than they were before. And that means using every single dollar of American Rescue Plan funds to make sure that the programming is better for our students. And yes, we do have a responsibility to communicate what we're doing with the money. Those are taxpayer dollars. It is our responsibility to do that, but we have an opportunity as educators, an opportunity we've never had as long as I've been in education, to really reimagine education, make social and emotional well-being a part of the learning. I saw summer school programming this summer that I hope never goes away. I hope that influences what we do from September to June, because it was better in many cases. Kids were with one another outside. They were engaging in activities together. Kids were doing things hands-on. I saw more robotics and STEM activities this summer than I ever seen in the past. And I've been in summer school programming in the past. We're changing the narrative on what it could be to learn through American Rescue Plan funds. And that's what we need to keep our eyes focused on. What we're doing to provide better opportunities for our students, not only academically, but also socially and emotionally.
What does that mean, though? Does that mean, when you were talking about what you saw this summer, you want to standardize exactly what every summer?
Well, the word standardize has a different meaning to different people, but listen. People delivered this summer. I was in Oregon, and I saw a summer school program that was twice the size of what it normally was. I saw kids outside. They were all safe. They were engaged. They were happy to be together. And they weren't sitting down doing skill and drill, right? They were doing hands-on activities. They were learning how to communicate effectively. They were learning how to share. I went to a Boys and Girls Club in Camden, New Jersey. I didn't want to leave. They were set up with centers. There were academic centers. There was fine arts and crafts. There were swimming. There was basketball. And these kids were engaging with one another. That's what it should be, experiential learning. We know children, upper middle class children, parents spend 6 times as much as students who live below the poverty level in enrichment activities. I can sign my kids up for soccer. I can sign up my daughter for volleyball or for dance. I can do that. For many of our children, they're sitting at home, being cared for by someone, but not able to get out and maybe have enrichment activities. So these summer learning experiences are critically important as we address achievement disparities. We know, I think about 70% of the influence on achievement gaps happens during the summer slide.
So
why do we go back to the same system that gives kids 2 months without engagement in the summer? We need to rethink that.
So what are you specifically asking states to do when they receive those federal funds to do this?
Well,
how do you, I mean, we're talking about exhausted educators. How do you make these programs happen?
But see, the problem is that we always think that we're going to add more to the same teachers. We can't. We get to develop the infrastructure of our schools. Family school liaison who are helping families be connected in the community. career counselors that are helping students become advocates for their workforce development pathway. We need to build our schools with these funds to help engage our community partners like the ones that are in this room. They do marvelous work. They should be at the table when thinking about what summer programming looks like. Really. And it shouldn't take our teachers being tired for us to say, hey, you have great ideas, great programming. We should be doing that already. Listen, there's an increase in funds. If you look at our budget proposal, like one of the biggest sharp increases in requests is for community schools. Why? Because we recognize that it takes a village, and we're not alone in this. We're partners in the process, and we have, and I mentioned the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA's, there's Girls Inc. where I live. There's so many different community partners that do this work. And I used to tell superintendents during the pandemic, yes, teachers are exhausted, everybody's exhausted, but you know who else had to shut their doors during this pandemic? Those 501c3s that do great work for our kids. Why are we not using ARP funds to get them back into the mix? Those are the things, and we need to create a sustainable model. We need to create a sustainable model that recognizes the assets we have in our community. That's the work of education moving forward. It's not saying, okay, teacher, now from 4 to 6, I need you to be the best, Lego robotics person. It means I have somebody in the community that does that already. Let me open my doors and make our school a community school, because it is the community's school. So that's the evolution that I'm talking about. That's the excitement that I feel to say those ideas that we know are happening in pockets of excellence across our country, we need to systematize it. You need a seat at the table, and we need to make sure that what we're doing holistically is meeting the needs of our students. And that goes from food insecurity, housing insecurity, extracurricular activities. So many of our students, they go home and they don't have anything to do when they go home. And other students who are more fortunate have opportunities to go from one activity to the next. We need to close that divide as well. And we have the tools to do it now. We have the partners to do it. And we have people that are thinking that way. We need to give them a seat at the table to make sure that as we move forward, this is not just a blip on the radar, that this is how we do business in schools now.
Mr. Secretary, I understand our time is up, if I'm looking at the right clock here, so I'm going to thank you for your time. Thanks to all of you for coming out today. And Aaron.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Secretary Cardona. We're totally honored and grateful for your leadership and participation in our conference. Margaret, these are very serious questions about serious times and very serious issues that we all agree. But Secretary Cardona, can I just give you the biggest shout out, as we've all appreciated every leader of every Department of Education that we've lived through, but you are stepping up in a way for our field and for our children in a way that we have not seen, and we appreciate you so much and your team. So thank you for your commitment. And we want to be partners with you, and we want to help address these achievement gaps and these opportunity gaps, and we are going to do everything we can to work side by side with the school, with your investment, and make all our families and children proud. So thank you both for a wonderful conversation. We are going to have, dessert is going to be on your table. We're going to ask Secretary and Margaret, we'll give them a chance to depart. And then afterwards, everyone will be able to go to their next sessions, which will be great too. And then there's just more on the agenda. But thank you, everyone, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.